Everyone, and welcome to our presentation for the Cambridge and District Geographical Association GeogMeet. My name is Tom, and I'm joined by Thomas and Oscar from the Perth School in Cambridge. Our question is, do borders still matter in a globalised world? In a world of digital interconnectedness, international shipping, and mass migration, it might seem like borders are dissolving, but we'd like to argue that the reality is far more complicated and important than that.
Borders operate across three dimensions. Politically, they define sovereignty, who governs, and who makes the laws. Economically, they regulate trade, set tariffs, and control capital flows. And culturally, they often divide or cut across identities, languages, and shared histories. A border isn't a single thing. It's a combination of functions, and that matters because globalization may have weakened borders in some areas while strengthening them in others.
On one hand, there is the argument against borders. Global trade in goods and services now exceeds $32 trillion a year, and there are 281 international migrants worldwide. In addition, 5.35 billion people use the internet, a space that by design has no national borders. The EU Schengen area lets 420 million people cross 27 international borders without showing a passport, and the WTO, World Trade Organization, has cut average tariffs from 22% in 1947 to under 3% today. And global supply chains routinely cross 10 or more borders before the product reaches the consumer. By these measures, it's tempting to conclude that borders are becoming irrelevant, relics of an older, more fragmented world.
However, there is also a counter-argument. Looking at Brexit in 2016, the UK voted to leave the European Union, which was arguably the most successful experiment in reducing borders in history. This is because a democratic majority decided that national sovereignty, control over laws, trade rules, and who enters the country mattered more than economic integration. Also, look at Ukraine. The war there is at its core a border dispute. Russia's invasion was about refusing to recognize Ukraine's right to exist as a sovereign state within its own territorial borders. These aren't minor events, they're defining political events of recent years, and both of them are heavily tied with the meaning, legitimacy, and defense of borders.
Borders shape not only politics, but they also shape life chances. As seen on this chart, GDP per capita ranges from around $80,000 in the US to just $1,000 in Ethiopia. This reflects an enormous economic gap that borders lock in. Term used by economists is the passport lottery. An American passport gives you access to 186 countries, whereas an Afghan passport only allows 28. Where you're born determines how freely you can move, which shapes education, work, and opportunity. Economist Michael Clemens has argued that truly open borders could potentially double world GDP, because labor flows to where it's most productive. Yet while capital moves freely across borders, people face increasingly tighter controls. Borders, in this sense, aren't just lines on a map, but mechanisms of global inequality.
So where does this leave us? We'd argue that the key insight is that borders are evolving instead of disappearing. Historically, borders were hard physical barriers such as walls, checkpoints, and other strict controls. During the peak of globalization in the 1990s and 2000s, they softened. Schengen, NAFTA, and the WTO all loosened restrictions on goods and people. But today, something different is happening. Borders are becoming smart, with biometric databases, digital surveillance, and algorithmic visa systems. They're highly selective. Capital and data flow freely, while people, especially those from the global south, face tighter controls than ever. We argue that the border hasn't gone away. It's simply become more sophisticated, more invisible, and, arguably, more unequal.
So, do borders still matter in a globalised world? Our answer is yes, fundamentally, but not in the way they used to. Borders still define sovereignty and protect identity, as Brexit and Ukraine make clear. They still lock in economic inequality, acting as barriers to human movement even as capital flows freely. And they're not becoming obsolete. They're becoming more technological, more selective, and more asymmetric. Globalization hasn't erased borders. It has transformed them into something more complex, and in many ways more powerful than ever. Thank you very much for listening. We're Oscar, Thomas, and Tom from the Perth School, Cambridge.